Hey everybody, well, time to make another update video on my 93 Ford Escort LX Project, which I've entitled Green Hornet. So, if you followed my videos, you know kind of what's been going on. We repaired the vehicles, various problems, still had a few issues we needed to work out before we got on the road, but I transferred it over to the grandfather of the girl that it was intended to go to, so he can drive it. But, as you can see, it's back here with additional problems. We just got done fixing it, so I'm going to provide a brief tutorial on this. So if you have a early 90s Ford Escort, if it's an LX, EX, I think even the early ZX2s have hydraulics on the clutch. The problem that this car had was the guy was driving it. It never really had much clutch pedal. It always engaged right down by the floorboard. But about 2 weeks ago, he was driving into Walmart and he came across a situation where the clutch would not disengage and it wouldn't shift gears. He couldn't get it into gear, and if he had the clutch all the way to the floor with the car in gear and the engine moving, the car tried to crawl forward. So if you've got a early 90s Escort hydraulic clutch and your car's experiencing this kind of situation where it wants to crawl forward with the clutch pedal all the way to the floor, won't shift out of gear, won't shift into gear, here's a little brief tutorial on what your situation is. Now, first of all, most all modern cars are now hydraulically clutched. There's no mechanical clutch linkages on most vehicles these days. So the clutch system operates very much on the same principle as the brakes. That all being said, we ended up replacing the master cylinder and the slave cylinder on the clutch, as well as flushing the lines. So let's kind of illustrate here. First of all, you'll notice here's our brake master cylinder reservoir. There's the brake master cylinder below it. The early model Escorts use a independent clutch, but uses a shared master cylinder reservoir. This reservoir provides brake fluid for both the brakes as well as the clutch. This rubber line right here, that goes from the master cylinder reservoir all the way down to the, I think you can see it right there. Yeah, right there is the master cylinder for the clutch. Nice new silvery shiny install. In order to get access to that, you've got one nut on the inside of the firewall under the dash, one nut on the outside. You have to remove the battery, the 4 bolts that hold down the battery tray. You have to get that out of the way. The wiring has to be moved out of the way just enough to get access to it. We had to disconnect and remove this. We had to disconnect or unplug the plug for the windshield wiper motor and the master cylinder for the brakes, just to get everything out of the way. There's a nut, and then there's a hydraulic line. Tell him what was the size of the hydraulic line that goes to the 10mm hydraulic line that goes to the clutch cylinder. And of course there is a compression clamp similar to this one. Just disconnect it all, pull it out. And we started actually with the slave cylinder. So the slave cylinder is right there, easy access, 2 bolts and a hydraulic line. You do have to remove the rad fan. This is in the way and doesn't give you enough really room to maneuver in there. So we ended up replacing the slave cylinder and the master cylinders in order to get this car functional again. Okay, so here's the original master cylinder. It would mount in the car like that. Like I said, you've got one stud that goes from the inside, one from the out. This is the line that connects the hose that goes to the reservoir. I don't manage to drop it. And this is the port for the hydraulic line that goes to the slave cylinder. And that, I purchased this for $25. This is the slave cylinder, connects on the transmission, 2 bolts, hydraulic line here and here, or hydraulic line here. This is the bleeder actually. This is the hydraulic inlet line. This is very loose. It's not supposed to be this way. This slave cylinder is extremely wore, and